Brucein, what do you guys think? Um, are our candy opinions valid? Just leave a chat message if you think that's true. If you think what we're saying is okay. Um, so our guest today, I'm going to read this awesome bio that he provided. Um, so we're talking to Bruce Varsniak today. Did I? I'll ask if I pronounced your name right. Bruce is the president of Now Hear This Incorporated, which promotes music clients as well as authors, and he has even done work for small businesses and an Olympic athlete. So if you become an Olympic athlete, you know where you need to go. Bruce is also the host of the Now Hear This Entertainment podcast, which has been released every week since February 2014. So far, that totals 336 episodes. He's written a 4-volume ebook series providing tips to up-and-coming performers, and he is also a national speaker. So I'm going to throw Bruce on the video here and do the thing there. And away we go. Hey, there he is. Let me get you up here.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Bruce. Let me get your audio going here. Hey, Bruce.
There I am. Hello,
There you are in
friends.
the video. Let me flip you around there. Da-da-da. Rotate, flip horizontal. Hey, all right. How's it going, Bruce?
It's going great. It's going great. I'm enjoying watching the captioning at the bottom because it took Wozniak, which is such a long, difficult Polish last name, and changed Wozniak to Ferris. Bruce Ferris.
What?
What? Where? At our chat?
In the closed captioning at the bottom of our chat, it said Bruce Ferris. So I think that like a good alias, like a good on-air name would be Bruce Wayne, since I'm Bruce W. And they both, my last name and Bruce Wayne both start with W-A. It's like, never mind Bruce Wayne. That's the whole Batman that's been done. Like, just change to Bruce Ferris, and that way you have a good story for it. When people say, wait, how did you come up with Bruce Ferris? Why is that your on-air name?
Is that a first, by the way? Or is this just going to happen all the time?
No, this is a first.
Oh, that's so funny because
Only on Crimes Against Folk.
Yeah,
guys. You heard it here first.
I guess the auto captioning is trying to be Ellis Island now. I don't know what's going on here.
Crimes against last names.
So it is Wozniak. We've done it. We said it right.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Of course you said it right.
I know. I've known. Oh yeah, we've known Bruce for many years, and it's very exciting to have you here today, Bruce. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me. The two of you know tons and tons of people, so there's lots and lots of others that you could have asked other than me. So I'm honored that I'm already a guest this soon on Crimes Against Folk.
Oh yeah, we were thrilled that you wanted to join this soon. We were kind of outlining our wish list, and you were near the top of it. So like, it's just, yeah, this is really exciting. So
you.
did you have we like when we bring guests on the show, we like to have them share a story from their own experiences, and I know we primarily have musicians on here, but as a podcaster who's been doing this for 6 years, every week for 6 years now, you've got to have an incredible story or something that you find very interesting that you could share with our guests, if you don't mind.
I do have a story, and it has nothing to do with my role as a podcaster. It has everything to do with, well, one of the many artists that I've promoted over the years. And in thinking about this story for your show today, I really decided that what I'm about to share is going to appeal to 3 different segments of the audience. So for people who just like kind of the storytelling aspect and are interested in hearing about the music business, I think this will be of interest to them. But more so on the level that if you're just somebody who supports live music and goes to see performances in person, there's going to be a takeaway for you. I think it's also very inspirational for artists themselves, because you do show after show after show, and you hear the old expression that you never know who's going to be in the audience, and you say to yourself, yeah, that's true, and it may have happened to you before, but I think it gets very easy to just put it on autopilot, and some days you're not having a good day.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of go through the motions. And if you remind yourself that you never know who might be in the audience, you can say, okay, wait, I really have to deliver because it's going to be the first and only time this person sees me.
Mm-hmm.
So the story that I'm getting at is I had a client booked, and this was also interesting because it was rather last minute for all intents and purposes. She told me that she was going to be coming down. For those watching, I am in the Tampa, Florida area, and she was going to be traveling to Melbourne, Florida, which is over on the other coast. It's a little more than 2 hours. I think it ended up being 2.25 hours. I drove to go to the booking, and she said, I'm coming to Melbourne, Florida. If you could just find me anywhere to perform, I would just like to do a show in the short amount of time that I'm going to be down there. And so I booked her into this, I'll call it coffee shop, but I really loved this venue because I love Starbucks, but this was not Starbucks. This was a local business that really catered to live music. They really catered to kind of that like living room feel inside. And so just to forward the story along a little bit, she's performing, and I keep very busy during that. I'm taking pictures, I'm checking the sound, I'm rolling video, kind of monitoring, what we have available for handouts in terms of promotional items or merch or whatever it is. And one man approached me and he says, "You're with the artist?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, she did Leaving on a Jet Plane, and that song really spoke to me." And he went on to tell me how he was a veteran and he remembered as she was singing it, it took him back to a point in his life where he was going off to serve our country and having to bid farewell to the woman in his life. And he was getting very teary-eyed, and he said, "Please share that with her." And so I told her later. Well, then there was someone else who approached me almost as she was finishing, and he said, "She's really talented. I want to know all about, what are you doing with her?" So I really kind of gave him the lowdown on what we were up to, and he said, "I'm just a local guy. I'm just a realtor. I've been living here for 6 or 8 years now." He said, "But in a previous life, I used to live in Los Angeles." And he said, "Your girl is really good." He said, "And I really think that she deserves every opportunity that she can get. She deserves to go on to bigger and better things." And so he said, "If there's anything I can do to help you," he said, "I might still have some acquaintances back there that maybe I can connect you to." And I said, "Well, please do, because I'm actually going out there in a couple months." I said, "And if there's anybody that I can meet with, I'd love the opportunity." And so he said, "I'll copy you on the emails. I'll put out some feelers." He dropped a few names to me, but lo and behold, one of the names that he ended up mentioning did end up responding and saying, "I went to the link that you provided. I'm really intrigued by this girl and her music. Yes, please put the manager in touch with me." And so I was able to make this connection with someone who was a huge, huge songwriter, producer out in LA who had worked with some of the biggest names that there are. And here's this guy, Bruce, down in Florida that drove 2.25 hours to be at his client's gig, making this connection with some guy who's just a realtor that happened to used to live out on the West Coast. And fast forward to my trip out to LA, and there I was, ironically, sitting in a coffee shop, having a wonderful, wonderful sit down, get to know each other for what probably turned out to be 90 minutes with this gentleman who I've ended up maintaining a wonderful relationship over the years. I want to say, for some reason, I think that might have been 7 years ago.
Oh
And
my
to this
gosh.
day, we're still in touch, and whenever I'm out in LA, we get together. So, like I say, it's a very motivational story that you just don't know what can happen, and you got to give your best performance. But like I say, for the audience, if you see someone that's really good, and you think somebody, or you yourself can help them in some way, don't hesitate to approach them, because that means the world to them, especially when it is, I'm quote unquote just playing this coffee shop in Melbourne, Florida, and all of a sudden look at what it turns into. So that, as you can tell, I've hung on to that memory as though it was last month and not as long ago as it really was.
Yeah, I could tell. I mean, that's a fantastic story.
That's an incredible story. Wow. Yeah, it's true. You never know who is sitting in the audience, and I mean, I think I've heard a lot of those stories. We attend the Far West conference, and one time there was a woman who went in. She thought she was playing for nobody, and there were maybe like one or two people sitting in the room, and she kind of just threw away her performance. And turns out there was a really big house concert host that had shown up just to hear her play, and they just weren't interested after that. So this is a perfect example of why you should go in, just give your all no matter what, because you don't know who is sitting there. And Bruce, you're one of the most supportive people I've ever met in my entire life of independent artists. I just want to urge everybody to go check out Now Hear This Entertainment. He has seriously some of the most amazing music you're going to hear ever on his show, and hear the stories behind the songs and the artists. As well, because Bruce has been so supportive of everybody else, I'm going to suggest that we all be supportive of him. He does have a Patreon account. It's just $5 a month to support Bruce. I put it in the chat link, and I'll go ahead and put it again there later, as well as our show notes, because you'll get bonus content as well and hear these amazing stories with these great artists.
Thank you, Ashley. And you don't know this, but you're actually a part of another one of those. You never know who might be their stories. So same client, we were in Nashville one time, and I had her booked to perform 4 nights in a row, and on the 4th and final night, she was done. It had been a real grueling couple of days that we'd been there, and we ran into a double booking situation at a venue in Nashville on the 4th and final night, and she said, "That's okay, just let it go, let the other person perform, let's just go back, maybe I'll get my guitar out and write a little bit." And I said, no. We didn't come to Nashville to miss out on these chances. We're going to follow through. And so I have this approach that I call my 4 P's approach, which is patient, polite, professional, but persistent. And so I stayed with it. She got to perform, and she was fighting me. Full disclosure, she was fighting me and saying, I really don't want to do this. Like, I don't know why you're pushing me. It's not that it's not meant to be. Someone's already booked. I don't want to start any trouble. And I told her, I really want you to think about this and do it. So she ended up deciding I'll do it. So as her show is ending, she's coming off stage, and I'm over on the other side, packing up the camera, packing up the merch, getting all of our stuff together. And I hear her saying, "Well, there's my manager over there." And she's motioning me. So as I walk over, she says, "This is my manager. This is Bruce Wozniak." And so this person who had approached her is a publisher and is expressing interest and saying, "Your client's really good. I'd like to know more. Let's exchange information." And so while I was in town, this publisher said, "You ought to go see a guy named Johnny Garcia. He's a guitar player for Garth Brooks, and I'll see if I can get him to come and see her play also." And it didn't work out for him to come see her, but I went and said a quick hello to him. That was that. And fast forward to once I got the podcast going, for the people that are watching right now, Ashley was one of my first guests, and Ashley was kind enough to say, "Let me get you Johnny Garcia to be one of your guests," since I've done work with him. So Johnny, now mind you, as Ed was reading my introduction, Ed said that I'm up to 336 episodes. I still to this day know that Johnny was episode 24, because to this day, that is the most listened to episode ever of Now Hear This Entertainment.
Wow.
Episode 24 is so popular. And it's actually one of the ones, when I tell people the guests that I've had on my show, that's the 3rd one that I mentioned. I don't know how I ever put them in this order, but I tell people that my guests have included Roy Orbison Jr., the keyboard player for Aerosmith, the lead guitar player for Garth Brooks, which is Johnny Garcia, and then I go on to say the drummer for Cheap Trick, the bass player for Pink, the trumpet player for Billy Joel, and then 3 Grammy Award winners, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, a Las Vegas headliner, 3 Emmy Award winners, and then participants from American Idol, The Voice, America's Got Talent, and The X Factor. And I don't want to get into it now, but it's amazing if you look back at some of those and say, well, how did you get these people? I mean, like I said, Ashley, you're the one that really made that interview happen for me with Johnny. And I look at some of the other ones, and one of them, the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, he's the founding guitarist from the band Heart, Ann and Nancy Wilson.
Yeah.
He started following me on Twitter, and I wrote to him and said, thank you for following me on Twitter. Oh, by the way, would you like to be on my podcast? And he's like, sure, I'd love to. And he and I are still in touch to this day, by the way.
Oh, that's great.
That's so cool. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Huh. I had no
there's
idea.
such power in all this stuff. And I always talk a lot on my podcast about the importance of the CO word, which is collaboration, as opposed to the CO word, which is competition. Because too many people look at it the wrong way as competition, when you can collaborate with one another like the three of us are doing now and accomplish so much together.
I totally agree.
I think I just mentioned that in our last episode. In fact, there is no competition in music. When people say to me things like, "Oh, well, Nashville just has so much competition," and I'm like, "No, there's not." I mean, if you want to look at it that way, sure, then you're gonna lose that competition. Otherwise, it's a collaboration.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had another question, because obviously what's happening right now, the pandemic has all but, shut down the live music situation. But I was curious how it has affected the podcasting landscape, and I wanted to get your perspective on that, being a pro podcaster. What has the pandemic done for you specifically, and also on kind of a worldview, if you have that info?
Well, for me in particular, I actually have felt guilty that I don't feel that it's been any different, because I've been doing it for, as I said, almost 6.5 years. And so I'm just in such a routine, that I have just continued to book guests onto Now Hear This Entertainment the same way that I have when there wasn't a pandemic. And one difference might be that, of course, as is the case with so many other things, I do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements, and I've been doing some podcasting speaking engagements online instead of going to conferences. In fact, the last one that I went to was the first weekend in March. And that was just as the coronavirus was starting to get a little bit of momentum. So much so that I know there was 2,000 people registered, and maybe 1,600 showed up. Because,
Wow.
There were people that were starting to get nervous about it. But at the same time, it's really kind of just opened everybody's eyes up to what we can all do with technology, that we can still, quote unquote, meet online, and that whether there's a pandemic or not, you can still do podcasts. And so I think what's done, Ed, globally is, I think, bigger picture, I think it's kind of awoken a lot of people who have talked about, I should start a podcast someday, to, well, I guess now is that day. I keep talking about that. I always refer to the rainy day list. We all have these, well, someday I'm going to X, someday I'm going to Y, someday I'm going to Z. It's like, well, guess what? I think that rainy day is here now, because this pandemic has got everybody quarantined. So how about now to finally start getting that podcast going? And so I think what's also happened is I've seen people who have said, well, there's just too many people podcasting now. And I say, well, number one, be forewarned that when you hear these numbers out there, that there's more than 1 million podcasts on iTunes now, there's only a fraction of them that are actually current, meaning that they're still active. So even though there's more than 1 million podcasts on iTunes, I think the number is only about, let's say, approximately a third of them. I think it's somewhere around maybe 350,000 or less that are still active, because a lot of people, there's a word called pod fading. A lot of people just, they tire of it, they start missing episodes, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I tell people is, don't get discouraged and think that there's there's too many podcasts. Number two is, I saw a statistic of the ratio of blogs to podcasts, and it's crazy. I think the number was something like 2,700 to 1. For every 2,700 blogs, there's one podcast.
Oh my gosh.
And of course, I also tell people about, the more niched down you are, the better. So if you have something that's really specific, you're going to be in a better position to succeed. But even if it's not that specific, and you say, well, other people are doing a podcast about this too. Yeah, but nobody's going to present it the way you are. Nobody has the thoughts and opinions and background that you bring to it. So do it anyways.
Yeah.
Yep.
I totally agree.
I mean, it's like you wouldn't say that about music. You wouldn't go, oh, well, it's an oversaturated market, so we may as well just not do it. It's like, are you passionate about it? Then do it.
Great point. It's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you call it your rainy day list. I tend to call it a moonshot list.
Yeah, I've heard you say that, Ed.
And I think, and not to make it like, discouraging. I think that's an inspirational thing. Like, this is a goal we know can be difficult, but we're going to get there because it's going to make things so much better. And so, we have a list of a few moonshot goals. I think one of them was going on tour in Europe, which we did, and I think another one was a podcast, which we've done. So I think everyone should have those kind of lists. If you're wary of doing like the 5-year plan thing, having a list of goals might actually help out, because you can get to them sooner, or just you'll know that they're something you can aspire to. So
well, and I'll tell you, the other thing is that I think people need to embrace technology and not overthink it and not be intimidated by it, because there are so many cool things that people have done in adapting to the pandemic and everything that's been brought with it. Obviously, musicians are going live on Facebook, they're going live on Instagram, they're going live on YouTube. But when I see, there's somebody that I've met when I've gone out to Los Angeles who runs a really successful open mic out there. She has taken that open mic and still done it live within the Facebook group that's associated with that open mic. I also saw that Auburn is doing a online writers round. So if people embrace this stuff, there's some really cool things that people are doing out there. And just like you're doing, Ed, using Restream and being able to put this on different platforms so that it's accessible to people and releasing it later as an audio podcast. I think it's fun, kind of seeing that. I don't want to say what the limits are, because it's almost like there are no limits. So I think it's fun to dive into some of these things and say, I might not be the expert in them yet, but I'm going to get myself out there, because otherwise it is out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Well, the fun part for us too has been the limits. Like, I think we talked about this either last week or the week before, where the limits can actually make you more proactive, more creative. Like for Ashley and I, it's a physical limit. Like, we're not even in the same zip code anymore, and so we had to figure out some way to keep doing this. So we just figured it out. And that's been the other great thing too.
And Bruce, you've been way ahead of that curve for years. I mean, I remember when you first started Now Hear This Entertainment. I believe I was episode number 6. Do you know if I have that right? I was way up there. It might have been. It was before 20, I think.
I believe it was 10. And I'm checking really quick here, but I have this bizarre mental Rolodex of guests, and I think it's also kind of more sentimental when you are one of the first ones. But I think you were 10. I could be. No, actually, you know what? Now I'm remembering who was 10. Strangely enough, so you could be right. I'm looking it up as we speak. I could give us a shameless plug. I'm looking it up on nhte.net.
nhte.net.
You're episode 6. There it is.
Oh, wow. How's that for the memory? That never works out in my favor. Yeah. But what's amazing to me is the fact that you're still doing it, and you are in that third, and you've been at the top of, and probably still are. Maybe you can share those numbers with us about your successes with your podcast, and also can you share with us what number you're on now?
So episode 337 will come out on Wednesday, and I'm up to 153 countries around the world where I've gotten listeners from, which when I see that, both of those numbers are really significant to me, because the 337 is, I take more pride in the fact that I've never missed an episode, more so than what the number is, because when you can tell someone that it's been delivered on time every week, as a listener, you're saying, okay, he's carrying out his end of the verbal contract. Like, he's telling us every Wednesday there's going to be a new episode. So when they look every Wednesday and it's there, and they say he's never let me down, he's never missed a week, I'm more proud of that than, oh, it's 337, because I meet podcasters that are up to 737, and I feel like a newbie. But the 153 countries, when I see what some of them are, and I think, oh my gosh, there's somebody in Saudi Arabia who listened to my podcast, that they took time out of their day to listen to this, in air quotes, this Bruce guy in Florida, that means a lot to me. And granted, it might have just been that they're a fan of the guest that I had on and they just wanted to listen for that reason, but it still means a lot to me that they invested their time. And of course, my hope is that they'll listen to other episodes and say, well, I first came to it for this particular guest, but I really enjoy this guy's show, so I'm going to tap the subscribe button and check out some of his past episodes and things of that nature.
Yeah, came for this guest, stayed for the rest. Like that's hopefully that's the goal, when you have, I think one of the goals when you have guests on, other than just wanting to really have a conversation and have some wonderful insight. How's your style for the podcast evolved over the years? I'm really curious about that. Like, are you still kind of doing it the same way you've been doing it, or did you change it a lot?
I think my changes have been very minor. I think the biggest change was that when I first started doing it, I didn't know. I was one of those people that thought, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming technology. How am I going to actually record this thing? And I used to go to a recording studio for it. And granted, I did catch a big break by partnering up with Tascam, and being able to do it all on my own was a game changer in the sense that I was just having this conversation with someone the other day that if you're at a studio, and obviously this goes for musicians too as it relates to recording yourself at home versus paying for studio time, the discussion was, if the studio tells you, okay, you have a standing time block every Thursday at 3 p.m., well, guess what? The guest better be available Thursday at 3 p.m. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on that interview, and you could miss out on somebody really good. So to me, that was another one of the benefits of doing it on my own, is if someone said, well, I can do it Saturday at 3 p.m., but I can't do it Thursday. I have a regular Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Well, great. Now I don't have to miss out on that.
Yeah.
But in terms of my style, I think I've just kind of tweaked some things over the years. The guy whose recording studio I used to go to, he used to say, what you're doing is a radio show. It's so polished, it really sounds like a radio show. But you also have to remember that I'm also doing it from the standpoint of someone who has been doing artist promotion for so many years, that I know what I would like my clients to be able to get out in an interview. That's why mine is long form, because in a 5 to 7 minute interview, you're getting asked the same old questions on the radio stations, and you're not really getting to roll up your sleeves and let the audience get to know you. And so I also had to learn that this guy at the studio would tell me, it's the biggest compliment that you get each week. I sit here and hear the guests saying, and I said, what? And he said, you'll ask questions, and right away I hear them saying, wow, that's a really good question. He said, and I think they appreciate the level of research that you do and that you're not asking the same questions. So I've tried to stay true to that. At the same time, I've tried to stay true to making sure that I don't slip into a comfort zone where it does sound like a radio show and it's not. I really put an emphasis on educating listeners who are musicians themselves that are trying to learn from the guests. So I don't want to get away from that. So the tweaks that I've made have just been little tricks that I've picked up from other podcasters, or they're basically me trying to get out of my own way and remember that the show's not about me. It's about the guest and it's about the audience. And I'm just kind of there, as the traffic director to make sure that's happening and not listen to my own voice for longer than I need to.
That's great. I love that philosophy there, the traffic director. That's that totally makes sense. I honestly feel that way with all of these buttons and pieces of software that I'm trying to
and there's a lot that Ed is working with over there.
But I like that philosophy.
Yep. Ed, you're our traffic director.
This was we're almost out of time here, but we did have one more question.
Oh yeah.
For you, and this was Ashley's suggestion, and I love it.
It's an important one. Lots of research behind this one, and
if you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Well, I'm probably supposed to put on that Batman persona that I alluded to at the very beginning, the Bruce W. persona.
Bruce W.
But I think as a young boy, you think about that question a lot over your lifetime.
Yeah.
And not just as a young boy. You start off as a young boy thinking about it. And the one that always stuck with me was being invisible. I just think that's a great one because you could observe so much more and people would still act the same way
Yeah.
because they wouldn't know that you're there. I think if you said, I want, say, X-ray vision or super hearing, well, they're still going to see you in front of them, so it might influence their behavior. But I think being invisible, it's not going to help in terms of, say, time travel or speed or anything like that. But just to be able to kind of be that fly on the wall that we always talk about, that cliche that we always use, fly on the wall, I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, especially some of those fun recording sessions that we think about, like to be invisible at like Abbey Road. Man, that would have been crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and how perfect for a podcast host. That is the perfect answer for you. So, Bruce, can you run through the audience and where we can listen to your show, and if you have anything upcoming, or I know I mentioned Patreon, perhaps you can mention that again, and anything else you want to share with us?
Sure. So I always just tell people to start at nhte.net. It's obviously the acronym for the show name, Now Hear This Entertainment. And you can listen there, but also when you land on nhte.net, there are icons there so that you can instead click on to go hear it on Apple Podcasts, which is iTunes. You can hear it on Spotify, on SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or Google Play Music. But then I always add in that if out of those 7 you say, oh, he didn't mention so-and-so, chances are really good that if you just search for Now Hear This Entertainment on whatever podcast platform you typically listen to podcasts through, you'll probably find it on there. I just stress that you have to make sure you put in all 4 words, because really quick the story was when I first started the podcast, I thought, well, my business is called Now Hear This, so I'll just probably call it the Now Hear This Podcast. And everybody's like, oh, wow, that's a good idea. And I'm like, no, it's just common sense. I went on iTunes and I typed in Now Hear This. And I saw somebody's already using it. And I thought, well, I'm going to pretty much be interviewing people who are having success in entertainment, primarily music. So let me try Now Hear This Entertainment. Okay, that's available. That's the name of the show. No real sexy story there. So when you're searching on whatever platform you listen to podcasts through, make sure you put in all 4 words, Now Hear This Entertainment. And then similarly, thank you, Ashley. Yes, the Patreon is either patreon.com/NHTE, or when you do go to that nhte.net, there's an orange colored support us on Patreon button there. And what I'm doing there, it's only $5 a month, but every week when I record the podcast interview, when I hit stop, I say, okay, stay on the line because now we're going to record some bonus content for Patreon. And I'll be darned if this thing isn't turning into almost half of another episode, because the guests are being really generous with the conversation. And it's funny because, Ed, you were asking me about changing my style, or any tweaks that I made. And I'm challenging myself more in that Patreon than the guest, because I don't want to sound like this uptight formal interviewer during the main podcast. But during the Patreon, I really challenge myself to just be conversational and just, okay, now we're just 2 people talking and the microphone still happens to be turned on.
Yeah.
Yet I find some guests that are so fascinating, that have so much going on, that I can't cover everything in the main podcast. And so we continued over on Patreon. And just this morning, I was posting across all my socials about the latest Patreon file that I put up. I interviewed these 2 ladies from New Zealand, and we went through the whole podcast interview. Towards the end, they started talking about something really exciting that's developing, and they said, but we can't really disclose it right now. And I said, okay, and we moved on. Well, then when we started talking about, whatever we wanted to chit-chat about on Patreon, all of a sudden they said, well, we couldn't say this in the main podcast, but we'll tell you here. And all of a sudden they make this huge announcement about this amazing opportunity that they're signing contracts for as we speak. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I hope people will go and sign up for Patreon now, because that's huge. And that, I actually felt honored that they would choose me, and in this case specifically my Patreon, to share this with people. So there's some pretty cool stuff, being talked about over there that, really to me that the $5 does help, but it also just kind of tells me that people feel like, hey, I like what you're doing. I recognize the time you're putting into it. And I want to hear these extra conversations.
That's wonderful.
That is very cool.
And by the way, there's links for all my socials on nhte.net also.
Okay.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff.
Okay, excellent.
So be sure to visit nhte.net, and you will find whatever you would like to find about Bruce Wozniak and Now Hear This Entertainment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bruce. This has been a very illuminating conversation. We're really happy you're able to join us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
I'm thankful for you, and it's so cool to have you at the beginning of our podcast since I was the beginning of yours, and hopefully we'll see you again on episode number 337 or whatever. Hopefully way sooner than that, in fact.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I really do appreciate it. And congratulations on launching the podcast. A lot of people say they're going to do it, and they say they're going to do it, and 6 months later they say they're going to do it, and the two of you did it. So congrats.
Thank you.
Thanks. That means a lot.
It really does.
All right. Take care, Bruce. We'll see you soon.
Alrighty.
Take care.
Got it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. That's Bruce Wozniak. We've put links in the chat. We'll put them in the show notes. Please do check out his podcast. It's wonderful. We did it live once at NAMM, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
That was I was with you that time.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were. Oh, man, that must be a very loud episode.
Yeah.
Have you
NAMM
guys
is
ever
always
been
loud.
to NAMM? Yeah, NAMM, it happens every year in LA at around January, and it stands for National Association Musician Merchants. Yes. And I just mumbled through that, but something in there was right. But it's a crazy conference. You can only really go if you happen to be working with a company. It's for gear mostly, but a lot of musicians like to go because it's a great way to connect with other musicians. And we're walking around and we're seeing Stevie Wonder and Marcus Miller walking past us. It's the coolest event, and we got to meet up with Bruce there, and it is the loudest conference you could ever possibly imagine because, as I mentioned, it's for gear. So that means there are people there with microphones and amplifiers, and they're all demoing their stuff at the same time. And we went because we had an endorsement with Sunburst Gear. They asked us to come do a couple of live performances, which we did. And I mean, it's funny. And we also did it for Avian Guitars, which we landed an endorsement at NAMM as well. We're going to do an episode on endorsements, by the way, just log that. But we are, it's pretty crazy because you can, even though there's all this other noise going, as long as you get kind of close enough around the booth, you can kind of hear what's going on with the different artists around. But yeah, with the words on an episode of Now Hear This Entertainment from NAMM.
Yeah, I remember that now. That was really fun.
Yeah, but Bruce has, I mean, he's a big deal, you guys.
Yeah.
He's
a big deal.
Yeah, I think he was number one for a while on Apple Podcasts. In fact, I think he was the number one. He hit like number one something on there, and
Gosh.
Yeah, and he also he's invited to be the keynote speaker at a lot of podcast conventions, which is a really big deal. And as well as, is it Tascam, Ed?
Yeah, he's endorsed by Tascam. They were developing, if I remember correctly, kind of a unit that you could, kind of easily produce podcasts. And of course, Bruce being a prolific podcaster, he managed to get that endorsement. And Tascam's a big company. They've been around for a while. When I heard that, I was like, whoa, Tascam. Wow, that's great. So, he's made it work, and that's the best thing. And again, he's super consistent, and he's really nice and always very helpful. So if you're thinking of starting a podcast yourself, definitely check out Bruce's podcast for a really good kind of example of how to run a good podcast. Absolutely.
Yep. And please do support his Patreon page if you can.
Yep.
I was actually talking to him about it yesterday, and I was like, it's so funny because the musicians, we all get the sponsorship, and I'm sorry, we don't get all the sponsorship, but we do. That's who you think about when you're like, oh, I'm going to support the arts, I'm going to support the musicians. But there are also people like Bruce who are, fueling the fire under the musicians and helping them keep going. So really, they need your sponsorship too. And Bruce is a really, really incredible person to sponsor on Patreon. So.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep. Patreon.com/NHTE or NHTE.net.